What is up, guys? Well, if you've been paying attention to the news, one of the biggest stories here recently, honestly, one of the biggest stories in the history of the movie industry, is this potential sell and acquisition of Warner Brothers Discovery, where very recently Warner Brothers Discovery and David Zaslav decided to put their company up, and three main bidders came to play: Netflix, Paramount, and Comcast. Now, Comcast seems to be the one who just pretty much immediately kind of fell out of the race, but here very recently, Netflix had the winning bid, announced on their own social media that they won the bid and they are going to be purchasing Warner Brothers Discovery. And the latest bit to the news is sometime this morning, Paramount announced that they are going to be attempting a hostile takeover of the company, which essentially means that they are going to completely circumvent the board of directors, who are traditionally the ones that make these decisions, and going directly to the company's shareholders to try to plead their case to them that they are the much better deal for the future of their financial situation. I'm not going to get into all the nitty-gritty details with numbers and everything, because I think there's plenty of other people who can do a much better job at that, and I just want to talk about my thoughts on the whole situation. But essentially, the difference here is that Netflix is just trying to purchase the streaming and the movie library of Warner Brothers Discovery for about $28 a share, and Paramount is trying to purchase the entirety of the company for about $30 a share, and they're giving an all-cash offer. So we'll find out what's going to happen. It seems like this is far from being over. Where the chips are going to fall as far as who Warner Brothers Discovery decides has the sweeter deal, and how long it's going to take, as well as whether or not, or how long it's going to take the government to actually approve whoever ends up winning out, this is yet to be seen. But this has been a big story that have gotten a lot of people who are big movie fans and people who talk about movies like I do every single day up in arms, because there's pretty much nothing but concerns no matter what outcome we see of this. First and foremost, I'll just say that it kind of feels like one of those pretty common situations nowadays where there's not really going to be a win. It's a lose-lose situation, and all we can do is cross our fingers and hope for the lesser of evils to transpire. But overall, it's just yet another event where it feels like the movie industry is starting to consolidate, is slowly dying this very unfortunate death. And it feels like within the next 15 or so years, maybe even 10 years, we're going to be looking at entertainment that is completely owned by Netflix, Disney, and Apple. Maybe Amazon will stick in there, but instead of having multiple studios, multiple different studio heads, all these different ideologies on the approach to filmmaking and the distribution to filmmaking, it's all just going to become about the bottom line and algorithms and the profitability of everything. And I hate to think of it, but it feels like one day there is going to be just an entire dissolution of the theatrical experience as we know it, and it's just going to be a matter of streaming services at home. I hope I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong, but every single time one of these major studios gets bought out and swallowed by another company, it feels like that future is getting nearer. So with that being said, what I wanted to do was kind of go over the pros and the cons as I see it as a consumer on Netflix winning this bid or Paramount winning this bid, and how it might impact us as movie fans. This message is sponsored by Rincon. Christmas is right around the corner, and Rincon's audio products are up to 20% off site-wide. From everyday essentials to the latest releases, it's time to upgrade your sound or get ahead on gifting. Just like a lot of you, I love listening to music and podcasts and YouTube videos while I'm accomplishing things around the house. The problem is, before too long, any pair of headphones or earbuds starts to get a little bit uncomfortable. Not to mention that anytime I close my ears off to the sounds happening in the rest of my house, that is when my dogs or my kids get into something that they shouldn't. Well, now with Ricon's Essential Open Earbuds, those are both problems of the past. The Essential Open Earbuds are so lightweight and comfortable that I honestly forget that I'm even wearing them. They're built for life on the go, so they slip on effortlessly and then stay there the rest of the day. And because they don't completely block out the world, I'm able to stay aware of my surroundings, whether it's traffic when I'm on a run or hearing my name called at a cafe. And these babies have 8 hours of battery life per charge, plus 36 hours of battery life in the rechargeable case that's also capable of wireless charging. The Essential Open Earbuds are here for the holidays, and they're selling fast. Rincon audio products are up to 20% off this holiday season. Just click the link in the description or go to buyraycon.com/Cody Cody Leach Open to save on Rincon audio products site-wide. And be sure to order by December 15th to guarantee delivery by Christmas, because great gifts shouldn't show up late. And thank you so much to Rincon for sponsoring today's video. So now getting into the pros and cons as I see it, and we're going to start with Netflix. If Netflix wins this bid and purchases Warner Brothers Discovery, what are the potential good things that could come from this? And I have to be honest with you, both of them. There's more cons and concerns than pros, but I'm going to try to be fair as far as what could impact all consumers, whether or not they have the same ideology that I have in loving the movie theater experience and wanting that to stay around. So the first one that I could think of, obviously, is just that Netflix would then have a completely unparalleled content library. They would swallow all of the Warner Brothers brands, which would include DC, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, everything under the HBO banner. And so they would instantly become the main player in the streaming service wars, in a time where it seems like we're constantly shifting between Netflix and Amazon Prime and HBO Max and Paramount Plus and Tubi and Peacock and Hulu and Disney Plus, and fuck, there's so many. This acquisition, depending of course on how they rolled it out and how they regulated it, I think is a very fair chance that it would instantly make Netflix the #1 dog, and maybe they still have been that as far as market share and as far as profitability, but just as far as content library, they would instantly trump everybody else. And if you're somebody that wants to have the biggest content library available to you as a consumer for at-home viewing, that would be a win for you, where you can just have one streaming service, probably Netflix, HBO, or Netflix, whatever the fuck they want to call it. I don't imagine they're going to keep them separate. And you would have access to what would typically be 2 different subscriptions under one umbrella. Now, whether or not they would make all of it available to you all the time, or they would do what they typically do, where they release bits of content and then they put it back in the vault and then they release other movies and it's this constant shifting thing, I honestly don't know, and that would, I guess, be a con that I'll get into later, but they would have a hell of a content library. A potential benefit that I see when you look at the difference in these two companies and their motivations to acquire Warner Brothers Discovery, I think Netflix very clearly of the two is the one that doesn't need Warner Brothers Discovery. I think that their company, as far as finances, is very healthy. I think they're valued at like $400 billion or something like that. They got fuck you money for days. And so their motivation to acquire Warner Brothers Discovery is not out of any sort of business desperation. It's simply so they can continue to grow and expand and become even more of a behemoth. And I think that there is a slight benefit to that in the fact that instantly, I think there's a lot of potential for expanding production capacity. I think they have all the money in the world to be able to put a lot of things in the green light stage, whether it's going to be for streaming service or theaters or a combination of both. And so that potentially would be somewhat of a benefit that us as consumers would see, is that instantly we would see a lot more production behind all of these Warner Brothers properties, where maybe it would be a little bit slower out of the gate with Paramount. And now moving on to the cons, and of course the first one you're going to think of is just the threat of having a monopoly, where Netflix would now own so much of the share of the movie production and the studio system that they would become a gigantic threat as far as antitrust and monopoly laws. And of course that would affect us as consumers, because now they can literally set the prices to whatever they want, and it doesn't really matter because they own so much that most of us would pay it as much as we would bitch about it. And, you know, that's going to be their biggest hurdle if they're going to win this deal and end up trying to actually take over Warner Brothers, is whether or not the government is going to recognize this as a potential monopoly and an issue with antitrust laws, or they're going to allow them to do it. Now, the discouraging thing is that no matter how many times this subject has come up, like when Disney purchased Marvel and Star Wars and then eventually purchased Fox, and then, you know, Paramount purchased Skydance, like anytime this conversation comes up of like, oh, they're going to have a lot of difficulties getting through the monopoly laws, doesn't really seem like they do. The acquisitions always go through. So is this going to be the first one that actually has difficulty? I don't know, but I think that the threat of them becoming way too big of a company in this space is absolutely real, maybe more real than any of the other examples I've given. And as much as we all bitch about Netflix's rising prices while the quality seems to go down, you know, the quantity goes up, but the quality goes down, I think that would become even more of an annoyance and frustration for us as consumers. I think of the two companies, while staying on this subject, Netflix would have the bigger hurdle getting approval of through the regulatory system. They would have more pushback on being a monopoly and having antitrust issues than Paramount would. So that's also a negative, is that this acquisition would become a lot rockier of a road. It would draw out a lot longer, and it would be a lot more strain on the company and everybody else. Another issue that I think is very real, despite the fact that I think they have all the capital in the world to absolutely ramp up production, the immediate negative that's going to come with that is that I think Netflix has always and will continue to value quantity over quality. There was a point when Netflix was known for quality, when they had shows like Stranger Things, and there was very much excitement with Netflix jumping into the game of producing their own movies, their own television shows. And since then, a lot of that has waned. Now, they still do have some good stuff. People still love Stranger Things. It's still a huge behemoth. Once in a while, you'll get a really solid Netflix movie or a new show that kind of takes over the water cooler conversation for a weekend. But I think it's entirely fair to say that they have a lot more misses and a lot more content that is viewed as just mediocre background noise than anything that actually makes a mark. And it's scary to think that that type of attitude, that type of business mentality would then bleed over to everything underneath the Warner Brothers umbrella, to where we're going to get a lot more DC, a lot more Harry Potter, a lot more Lord of the Rings and HBO properties, but the quality of all of it is going to go down substantially in favor of just getting more of it. But obviously the biggest concern with Netflix being the victor in this little bidding war here, which most movie fans are most prominently worried about, is the continued and the quickened death of the theatrical experience. You know, Netflix and all the CEOs and the people who are constantly letting these quotes out there as far as their business practices, they have not hid at all that they could give a fuck less about the life of the theaters. They could give a fuck less about the theatrical window. They very rarely, if ever, put any of their properties into theaters, with the exceptions being like the Knives Out movies. And, you know, you got this Stranger Things finale that they're doing an extremely limited theatrical run with. And, you know, maybe even a few of their few Oscar contenders, they'll give a quick little theatrical run. I think more so for qualification than anything else. But yeah, they have not hit it at all that at some point their goal is to dominate everything, to absolutely quicken the transition as far as consumers from going to the theaters to entirely experiencing media at home. And them acquiring Warner Brothers Discovery would absolutely quicken that process and would give them even more ammo to do that. And I don't think any amount of begging and pleading from those of us that are movie fans that want to go to the theaters, or any of the concerns raised by the multitudes of people in Hollywood, all the different guilds, the Writers Guild, the Directors Guild, they are all terrified of this acquisition for that reason alone. I don't think any amount of any of that makes one bit of difference to Ted Sarandos or anybody else at Netflix. I think they give zero fucks about anything. And if they could press the button and nuke the entire system right now and have all of us just experience movies and TV shows at home and all the theaters die tomorrow, I think they'd press that button in a heartbeat. And honestly, that's my biggest concern. That is my biggest concern with anybody taking over Warner Brothers Discovery, is the quickening of the death of the theatrical experience. But I think Netflix would be far and wide the one that would quicken that the most. And that really scares and depresses the fuck out of me, because the theatrical experience has always been one of my most valued things in life. I do not, no matter how great our technology gets at home, no matter how great the picture and the sound quality is, no matter what the comfortability and the convenience is, I do not want to live in a world where the theatrical experience is something that I can just tell people used to be great. I don't want to have my grandkids come and be like, yeah, you know, we used to go to this brick and mortar building where they had this monstrous screen and you'd buy popcorn, you'd sit and have this communal experience and watch a film. You guys, unfortunately, will never understand what that like. I don't want the theatrical experience to be like how I tell my kids what Blockbuster used to be. I just don't want that. And I think Netflix absolutely wants that. And that's honestly the one thing that they could do as a company to ease so many people's worries, both in Hollywood as well as those of us that just experience the fruit of Hollywood, is if they made some kind of a legal guarantee to preserve the theatrical window. If they said, okay, we're going to acquire Warner Brothers, but we're going to guarantee that the Warner Brothers films are going to be in theaters for 60 days or whatever it is. If there was something like that that was legally binding, that would take a lot of the worry away from the Netflix side, but I just don't see them doing that unless it's their absolute last-ditch effort. I feel like Netflix just really does not care about the side of their consumer that does not want Netflix to be the entirety of their viewing experience. For all of us that really enjoy watching things at home but don't want that to be the sole avenue of it, they clearly do not care about that opinion at all. And I kind of hope that that's their downfall, I'll be honest. I mean, you'd think at one point they would value, even if they view it as a small piece of their profit margin, that they would value what the theatrical experience can do for even their own properties. Like if you just look at this Stranger Things finale event, it's sold out all across the country and it's sold out in minutes. And they're slowly expanding to other theaters because I've seen one about 45 minutes away from me just pop up in the last couple of days. I'm hoping we're going to get a few theaters even closer to me so I actually can experience this in theaters. But if they did a wide theatrical run for just this one thing, a finale for a TV show, they would rake in money like fucking crazy. And so it blows my mind that as much as they want to preserve their dominance in the streaming market, why they do not embrace the other potential of utilizing the theatrical experience. They are the most against that of any of the streaming services and any of the studios out there. And I just don't understand it. I think it's absolutely vile and it absolutely sucks from a consumer standpoint. When you hear Ted Sarandos talk about it like he's quickening like the future, like he's the answer to all of the prayers of movie fans out there. Like we've just been sitting and waiting with bated breath for somebody to come along and save us from the horrible, horrible experience of having to go to the theater. I honestly think he believes that he's that guy. And there's probably many people that are on board with that because they just don't really value going to the theaters. But there's a lot of us out there that look at him like the devil for having that viewpoint. So yeah, that's going to be the biggest point of this video to me, is if Netflix gets it, I think that we can go ahead and start warming up our hands to say goodbye to the theaters. And now we'll move on to Paramount. Now, the potential pros that we have for Paramount is that, one, I think it is a healthier future for competition. Now, don't get me wrong. I think any version of any company acquiring Warner Brothers Discovery is a negative overall for competition and diversity as far as movie production goes, but I think they are easily the lesser of two evils between Netflix and Paramount in this case. I think that they are going to preserve a lot of the way that Warner Brothers Discovery works as far as the HBO and the Warner Brothers film production. I think there's a stronger chance that they will keep that running in its own kind of separate entity, and they will just kind of be the umbrella that carries all of it. You might see some production slow down the same way that we saw when Fox was acquired by Disney, but I think there is a much healthier future in that regard with Paramount. Just as far as the company itself is concerned, I think Paramount's going to have a much easier time getting approved for this deal. I think they're going to have much less of a hurdle as far as getting through the regulatory interference. I think they're going to be viewed at much less of a threat of being a monopoly and violating antitrust laws. And so that is something that is beneficial in some way, not only to the company, but just in not having this drag out and being some big messy thing online. And as far as the shareholders go, at the end of the day, I don't really give a fuck about the shareholders, but that is a benefit. I think it's as close to a guarantee as you can get that Paramount would preserve the theatrical experience, that they would preserve the theatrical window. They would be somebody that would try their best to slow the death of the theatrical window and the theatrical experience, if not maybe put some positive in the direction of that. Whereas Netflix very clearly is aimed entirely in the other direction. I think Paramount actually values having movies in theaters. I mean, they're the company that lets Tom Cruise make these Mission Impossible movies for the fact of having that movie experience be on screen. And, they had the big win of Top Gun Maverick and things like that. And, Warner Brothers Discovery have always been known as being a very director, creator friendly company. And they have had, I think, most of the box office wins this year than any other production studio. So I think Paramount would absolutely look at that as a win and would want to buy this company and keep those wins coming. And so I do think that Paramount would be the much healthier choice as far as just creativity and having an avenue for directors and writers and actors to continue to make movies for the love of movies and not just bottom line profit, but also those of us that still want to see movies in theaters. I think that's the better path. Now, moving on to the cons. I don't think that Paramount is immune to also being a threat of being a monopoly. As I've said, there's not really a win. There's just like, what's going to be the smaller loss here? I think they would be a smaller monopoly than Netflix would be if they came out on top, but they're still absolutely going to be a much larger player, having Paramount, Skydance, and now all the things underneath the Warner Brothers and HBO and Discovery banner. And so, like, no matter what, I can't look at that as anything but a negative. They might be the lesser negative, but it's still a big negative. You also have to acknowledge that Paramount is in a much, like, significantly less healthy place as a business than Netflix is. As I said, I'm pretty sure Netflix is valued at around $400 billion. Paramount is like $15 billion or something like that. Like, it's a fraction. And so, whereas Netflix is very clearly geared towards expansion and just continuing to grow and become this huge behemoth, I think there's a lot more motivation from Paramount that is in survival mode. It's let's get Warner Brothers to kind of lessen the debt that we're in, lessen the bleed of this company, and now we'll be in a much healthier place overall. And I think that is not as exciting in the sense of, you're essentially having something unhealthy acquire something else. Who's to say the unhealthy nature of the Paramount company is not immediately going to infect Warner Brothers Discovery, and now you just have this much larger unhealthy company. And I think production certainly would slow down on Warner Brothers Discovery. I think that the capacity for putting things into production would not be anywhere near on the level of Netflix. And so I think that's also something that could be a concern. And by no means do I want to get political at all on this channel or in this video, but you do have to acknowledge the fact, because it's been very widely publicized, that the Ellison family, who are the ones who own Paramount and the ones who are really spearheading this hostile takeover and everything, have a lot of close ties to the Trump administration. They have a lot of close ties and a lot more capacity to have wheels greased and have, certain deals become easier because of those government ties. And I don't think anybody, whether you are in support of or vehemently oppose the Trump administration, wants any of that muddying the waters of Hollywood, movie production, the studio systems, any of that. I mean, it seems like no matter who we have in office nowadays, as time goes on, things just seem all the more grimy. They seem all the more corrupt and all the more self-serving. And would just be another element of that. Like, I don't want to have any sort of situation where it feels like the president of the United States, no matter who it is influencing what media is created, whether it's in the news or in the fictional side. The government's going to be shut down until I get Rush Hour 4. And by no means do you want to find out that Paramount is, stretching this thing out because they're putting pressure on their ties in the government to block the Netflix deal, or they're going to have a much easier time getting approved and getting through all of these regulations against monopolies that very fairly should be held against them because of their government ties. So that's a small piece of it. And by no means do I want to get any kind of political debate with anybody. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. The concern of government being tied in with movie studio production is something that I don't want, no matter who's in the fucking office. At the end of the day, this entire thing is just very discouraging. It's very terrifying for those of us that love movies. Those of us that might not be as impacted as others, probably don't care as much and are completely just out of the loop on all this. But for me, as somebody that talks movies almost every single day, loves movies, it's one of my favorite things in life, I just really hate the fact that the longer that we go on, the older that I get, it seems like what movies used to be, what the movie studio system used to be, is just slowly getting crushed down into all of these, takeovers by a group of billionaires. And it feels like it's not really a creative market anymore. It's all about shareholders and the bottom line and profit margin. And we've seen that impact the quality of movies. We still get a lot of great movies nowadays, but it is a very widely accepted fact that movies don't feel the way that they used to. And I think this is just another body thrown on top of the pile of bodies in that regard. So I don't know what's going to happen. If I had to pick one, honestly, just for my own selfish preservation of the theatrical experience, I think I'd rather have Paramount come out on top on this one. Is it immediately, obviously going to be the grim end, the apocalypse of movies if Netflix wins it? I don't know. Time will tell. I just think the entire thing sucks. So this is how I view it. Let me know down below how you view it. Which one would you rather have come out on top and why? Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all of my 2025 movie reviews. I'm also going to put a link up here to my latest review, which is Five Nights at Freddy's 2. Was not a fan. Please like, share, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.